Hello again. This is Lance Cinema. I'm the gallery director for the Bryan Oliver Gallery at Whitworth University. I'm here today chatting with one of the artists who is a participant in our first exhibit of the year. This is Marissa Gibson.
Hello. I'm looking forward to talking about my work and really excited to be part of this exhibition. It was really nice to be invited. So thank you.
You're welcome.
So I guess I'll start with a little bit of, background about myself. I was born and raised Pacific Northwest. I'm currently living in Eugene. So it's a beautiful place right now. And, growing up, I was really inspired by all of the natural world around me and within a short drive, to see. And I try to put a little bit of that nostalgic inspiration into my artwork every day, and along with things that I've learned. So I call myself a science illustrator, and that's the biggest thing that I do is illustration. I paint flowers and birds, and that's a little, that's it. But it's my favorite thing to paint, and I really enjoy it. But growing up, I used to be constantly drawing and designing fantasy creatures and fantasy worlds, and part of that, I wanted to be as realistic and believable as possible with form follows function, and that led me to spend a lot of time studying and researching living creatures, and here I am now. So it's an interesting process, and I don't really understand it quite yet. But that process from fantasy to science illustration is kind of what got me here. So basically, I understand illustration as telling a story. So, for example, like a children's book illustrator is telling a story that is accompanied by words. And similarly, a science illustrator is giving info based on research or any other literature or even just personal interest. So what I'm trying to do through my work is to communicate my interests and my personal research. And yeah, it's an interesting combination of design and aesthetic, in addition to some of the fine art techniques that other studio painters work with. So balancing things that look nice and are interesting to look at is a really important part of science illustration. And I think about it a lot when I'm creating my little bird paintings, because they have to interact with their environment and other elements of the composition, like a branch that they may be perching on, as well as the general pose and behavior of the bird. I want the little piece that I've created to be a snapshot of behavior or something I've observed in nature. So I guess in summary of my paintings of birds, I think they're neat, and I think more people should know about them. So I paint birds, and the irises that I have in the show are sort of a side project that became something I'm very interested in. It's a exploration of light, texture, sort of combining those elements of aesthetic and compositional harmony with realism and precision in color and form. And all that comes from research and taking my own photos and working from those photos, both directly and with, a little bit of artistic liberties taken, just so it looks nicer.
Mhm.
But yeah, I like to share. I like to share what I enjoy about um, flowers, birds, nature, etc. In my work, and I hope that's something that can be taken from them by the viewer. I'm not I'm not here to tell you what you should be thinking about them, but you know, it's a it's communication, right? And since I'm not employed by any science name yet, uh, it's all me. It's all me talking through my artwork, and then most of it's reflecting my interests.
Very good. Thank you, Marissa. Um, yeah, so I have a couple questions, some of which you answered already, and then some that I think we can sort of delve into a little bit further. And I think the first one for me is about material or the media that you use, your paintings or watercolors.
Mm-hmm.
Um, what is it about watercolor that you're drawn to, or why watercolor versus another type of paint or drawing material? Is there something special about it that you think is better at fulfilling the role that you want to, or presenting the information that you want to present?
That's a good question. I'm not sure if it has more to do with materials that were available to me and now I'm just more comfortable using them. But
Mhm.
I do really enjoy the qualities of watercolor that allow luminosity through layering and using dry brush to create crisp detail and texture that I just really enjoy. And it's an interesting medium because the paint itself has certain qualities, some dry with granulating texture. The pigment falls out of the solution as it dries and creates an interesting grainy texture. And combining that into my work is something that um, I've explored more with the iris paintings because it is so much wash involved.
Great.
Um, versus the bird paintings is it's more using a little tiny brush and little brush strokes to create the feather texture and some of the really delicate patterns that exist in birds.
Mhm. Cool. Yeah, I think I mean, the range of sort of visual possibilities with watercolor. There's some similarities to oil paint, maybe if you're like really thinning it down and getting like thin glazed layers that show that translucency or the transparency. But watercolors seem to lend themselves to that in a really wonderful way. Um, yeah, and your work shows that sort of the variations that watercolor has, right? The transparency, sort of the luminosity. I think that's the
Mm-hmm.
word you used of
Yes.
the irises and like those what was it? I think in one of your at some point when we were talking, I think you talked about like the crepe paper kind of texture of irises
Mm-hmm.
and how it has that transparency, but if it when it layers up or when it's sort of there's more layers, it becomes more opaque, and really getting that with the watercolors is or watercolors are a really great way to show that, to see
Yes,
that.
there is, yeah.
Um, very good. The I'm curious about the scale of your work. The pieces that you have in the exhibit are all quite small. I think nine by nine or
Yeah, the birds are mostly 9 by 9. There's a few.
oh yeah
The
the
petal is nine
it's
by 12, and all
yeah
the iris are 9 by 12.
yeah.
Um,
Um, as far as the scale goes, is that just something that you landed on as just a sort of a regular size to work with? Is it a sort of dependent on the media where watercolor just tends to work better at a smaller scale? Is there something about that size of work that you're drawn to, or what is the reasoning behind that small scale work?
Yeah, I think it ultimately comes down to the mediums that are available to me. And you know, it's easier to transport around smaller things.
Sure.
But also I really like to work small and get into the nitty-gritty details. And doing that on a large scale just takes a lot more time. And more enjoyable for me to work quickly and be able to have maybe multiple things I'm working on at once that I can, start one, work on the more loose pieces, and then move on to the detail in another one, and then it's kind of an
Hmm.
endless process from there.
Hmm.
Um, it creates kind of a, I don't know, window. I had one of the pieces hanging in my house, and it was kind of a the combination of the frame and the piece itself created this like window, I guess, and it was this interesting like um, I don't know. I just wanted to look closer at it, even though I've seen it a million times and spent a very long time looking at it very closely.
Yeah.
Uh, but I like to think that you can see something that's a little bit smaller all at once,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
easier,
Yeah.
and then uh, it might be more likely that the viewer would want to get closer and want to see the detail.
Hmm.
And I think by spending time on the detail, it's there, and you want to look at it and see what it's communicating. And um, I do enjoy painting the details, and it's a very meditative process.
Hmm.
With the watercolor, that you have to spend a lot of time mixing colors and um, getting them just right so that they reflect nature and the color scheme that I want to have in my piece.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think there's, I mean, I agree that that smaller scale, the amount of detail that you're putting into them, there's a draw for that. Like when I look at them, I see them from across the room, and you get a vague idea of what they are, what they look like, but I get drawn into them closer and closer. The closer I get, the more details I see, the more that becomes apparent. And that's sort of a rewarding process of viewing when you have that sort of payoff as you get closer, as you look more closely, you see all those little details that go into that piece, which and on a larger scale, sometimes that interaction, it happens at a different distance. It may not be, it may change a little bit. So there's something about that. There's also something about um, the scale that reminds me of the things themselves. The birds are maybe a little bit bigger, smaller than they would be in life, but not a lot. The flowers seem to be about the same size as they would be in real life, and so there's this connection to the actual thing that's being represented. That's really pretty nice. Um, so I just have one or two more quick questions. One relates to scientific illustration. You've talked about your interest in scientific illustration, pursuing that as a career. What do you see? And this one isn't. We didn't talk about this beforehand, so this is going to be fun. But what do you see I mean, the role of the science illustrator traditionally has been for either like early on, it was to record, right? You have Audubon or those individuals who are out, finding things that people aren't actually really familiar with and recording these new forms of life, these new discoveries, and then other things people may think of when they think of scientific illustrator as creating illustrations for textbooks or for presentations or pamphlets or things like that. I don't know, but what do you see the role of what do you see the role of the scientific illustrator as today, or what is it that you would like to do as a scientific illustrator?
So the role I would say it's a communication role, and with the advent of photography, it's a great question to ask. Like, what is the point, I guess, of painting? And like you mentioned, Audubon is kind of seen as the pinnacle or the father of um, ornithological illustration,
Hmm.
and for good reason. He was kind of um, one of the first to combine more contemporary to him sensibilities of composition and realism with what we would understand today as science illustration being a record.
Hmm.
Um, and I think art allows a bit more of an intimate kind of view of the subject, whereas a photograph is much more um, surface level. Not to say that photographs don't have value in science communication, but the value, I think, of illustration in all of the different genres of science illustration, medical, chemical, uh, geological, all of that has the ability to express layers and personal experience that maybe a photograph might not.
Mhm.
It's I don't know, it's hard to explain because I'm not like professional science illustrator yet. Um, but it's definitely like reading others sort of thoughts on it is it has more of a personal effect than a photograph might.
Mhm.
Um, and they're not necessarily interchangeable, but they have the ability to do the same things, um, just maybe in a different way. I don't know if that makes sense.
No,
Um,
yeah.
but and for me, I it's a very dense, I guess, um, thing to be doing. There's a lot of people out there that are doing it,
Mm,
but not nobody's doing it the same way that I am.
mm,
And I
mhm.
think that's a really interesting um, thing about this form of art is that nobody does it the same way. Nobody has the same experiences. Nobody reads and translates the same information the same way. And I think that's, again, the personal part of it is um, there's illustration out there that uh, communicate the same thing, but I might like it better than another form.
Right.
So plus it's timeless.
Yeah.
Like, we still have Audubon's original plates. We still keep making prints of it, and it's beautiful and it's interesting to look at even after we have understood the subject as much as it can possibly be.
Mm,
Um, so that's what I like about it is there's in addition to the more personal aspect and the more in-depth aspect of an illustration, it's it's not going to go away, and I don't know, I really like thinking about it like that, that it's not going to go away. It's a timeless sort of thing to be doing.
well, that's fantastic. Um, yeah, yeah, that's really great. Um, Thank you very much for joining us today, Marissa.
Thank
Um,
you.
it's been wonderful talking with you again, and it's been great having the work in the gallery and on view so people can see it in person. Um, for all of those watching, thank you for watching. Um, Hopefully you have a chance to visit the gallery and see the work in person. If not, if you are far away or if you just can't make the time or find the time to visit us, I will have another video of sort of a slow video walking past Marissa's work so that you can get a better look at it. You can also find her work on this blog. There's a portfolio page and you'll find Marissa's work there as well. So thank you very much for joining us, and I hope you enjoyed this.